who did that, Max.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Santa Monica KTC. Thank you, Lama Adam, for joining us this evening. We're really so grateful to have you with us. Just want to let everyone know that we have some great event. We have a great event happening in at the end. I think it's the last weekend of September. It's Bardo Teaching and Transmissions with Lopan Lama Tobden. We sent out the information in an email. It's going to be in Idlewild in person, and that's going to be Saturday, September 23rd and Sunday, September 24th. So all the information is in our newsletter. It's also on our website. I think it's on our website, but we did send the newsletter out. So if you would like to register, and we're also doing making it available by Zoom as well. And if you would like to make a donation this evening towards Lama Adam, you can do so with the link on the newsletter that we sent out or on our website. And with that, we should all mute ourselves, and Lama Adam, hand it over to you. Thank you.
One more thing, Lama Adam is coming out soon as well.
Oh yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, Lama Adam will be here. I think you're here October 13th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that yeah.
Yeah, so you will be in LA in person at our Santa Monica KTC. We'll be doing that. Information will come out where, excuse me, the location of your teaching would be, and that's, you will be teaching on the 13th, 14th, 15th of October.
Yes.
So stay tuned for that too. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back virtually, and there's a couple things I want us to we usually have some kind of dialogue, I know, when I'm here, and I want to do some more of that tonight, because there's some things that I've been working through with this material, and it is really kind of personal material, so you don't feel compelled to speak about things you're not comfortable speaking about. But I would be curious for some of your thoughts and experiences with some of this stuff, because I think that's really where we start to apply these teachings, because you've probably heard said before that Dharma, as a Sanskrit word, has a lot of meanings, but primarily it means like the way things are. And we could say truth, which is maybe a little loaded with other religious uses of that. But there's an element of just the way things are. And if we think about it from that truth aspect, it occurred to me, it's not really like, hey, you got to believe this kind of a thing, but it's like, hey, you better figure out if this is real or not. You better test this. So this is really the wheelhouse of the stuff that I want to talk about in this new series, which I called Resilience and Resourcing on the Buddhist Path. So to start, I'm going to make sure I can share my screen here. Yep. And we'll do the refuge prayer to begin. Coming through? Good. Okay, so let's say the refuge prayer once in Tibetan, once in English, and once in Tibetan. O sangye chidang suki chodnam chamchu padu dakni kyapsuchi Taki jinso ki pesunam ki drola penchi sangye drupa. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of accomplishing generosity and the other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. O sangye chidang suki chognama chanchu padu dakni kyapsuchi daki jinsuki pesunam ki rola penchi sangye drupa. Abandon Zoelama Bojin Dagi Jehovah Okay. I'd like to start with a brief guided practice. So take a posture that's not too tight, not too loose, relaxed but alert. And we'll take a couple deep breaths in and out. Checking in, as I like to do at the beginning of these, checking in where we're at on a spectrum from spaced out, dull, to agitated, racing mind. Just noting if 5 is balanced, which side of that spectrum we're on. And in particular, checking in to see if we are within a window of tolerance of about 3 to 8. In most cases, we are. 2 or 1 would be the most spaced out or the most dull. 9 and 10, most agitated. And once we've noted where we are, just recalling at any point during these meditations that if you find yourself activated in a way that's unhelpful, you're welcome to shift your posture, or do your own practice, or engage in any self-care that would benefit you. And now what I'd like is take a moment to just generate an open awareness of the environment you're in right now. Feeling the space in the room, as well as your presence there. And now the invitation is to move your posture forward and kind of let everything move downwards. You might put your elbows on your knees, let your head hang, close your eyes. Feel a downward motion. Muscles loose. And then sitting back up. And take note again of that, where you lie on that spectrum. See if you notice any change. The next invitation here is to kind of do the opposite. So we're going to tighten up and look up. Muscles rigid, feeling an upward motion, eyes wide open. And then returning back to that neutral posture. And again, checking in to see if there's been some movement between dullness and agitation. And what we just did was 2 suggestions from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's Excellent at the Beginning of things we can do when we find ourselves mired in too much dullness or too much agitation. So those are methods we could apply if we find ourselves in that 1 or 2 range, or the 9 or 10 range. We're feeling agitated. We can stop meditating and switch into that downward motion, loose, eyes closed. We're feeling too dull. We can sit up, tighten up, eyes open, upward motion. But for now, let's just return to a basic practice of calm abiding meditation, letting our gaze rest naturally, following the bridge of the nose to a point in front of us. And placing the attention on either the breath, sensation of the air moving in and out of the nose, or the motion of the chest. Or if it's better for you, you could use a sense of gravity or weight in the seat. And we'll just place our attention there briefly. And if the mind wanders, we just come back. And now I'd like to invite you to lower your gaze a bit, wherever it was, go a little bit lower. Find a spot where you feel the effects of that lowered gaze. You feel a little bit more towards that dull side of the spectrum. And then returning to that place where we started, that neutral gaze. And then doing the opposite, raising our gaze a bit. It doesn't have to be straight ahead, even just a bit. You should start to feel a little bit more invigorated, a little bit more focused, maybe a little bit more agitated. And then returning to the neutral gaze, following the bridge of the nose to a point in front of us. And then the last thing I want us to do before we shift into a more conversational mode is I'd like you to try to think of a time where you felt strong and happy and present. And see if you can notice where you notice that in the body, where you feel it. What's different when you think about that time? Whatever you notice change, place your attention there. And as we begin to shift back into a non-meditation period, recall that you can always return to that resource throughout the rest of the session or anytime in your daily life. Getting ready to shift. Perhaps wiggle the fingers and toes. All right, thank you. So that was really a lot of methods for balance. We started out with some more extreme methods. Those are the methods that Rinpoche describes are things you can apply, like I said, when you're on the ends of that spectrum. So in the most extreme examples. And he actually says that when you, actually I'll read what he said, that a much better way to go. He says, torpor and excitement are defects that are impediments to the development of shamatha, as well as any other kind of meditation practice. Torpor occurs in meditation when you find that your body starts to feel weak, as if you could not even move if you wanted to. Your mind also starts to feel unclear without any kind of perky clarity. You might actually fall asleep at this point, but even if you do not fall asleep, your mind is dull. You may not be particularly disturbed by thoughts, and your mind may be fairly stable, but it is stable in a dull, sleepy way. As long as you remain in this state of torpor, you will not receive any benefit from shamatha practice. The second defect is excitement. This can manifest as the arising of thoughts related to the kleshas, such as attachment or anger, or it can be some kind of attraction or irritation about the external environment. In either case, the problem with excitement is that it prevents you from settling your mind on the chosen object or technique. Often this happens in the following way. A mental affliction arises, which causes you to direct your attention to an external object. Your mind becomes so involved with that object or sense perception that you cannot bring yourself back to the technique, even when you recognize that you have become distracted. He says a little bit later on, it is necessary to rely on remedies until the problem is resolved. There is not a certain amount of time you should do it, such as a certain number of breaths or minutes. You simply apply the remedy as needed until the torpor or excitement has been dispelled. However, if you find that there is so much torpor or excitement that no matter what remedy you apply, you cannot break through it, you should stop practicing and do something else. This is because if you continue to practice within the state of torpor or excitement, you will perpetuate the habit of it. You should take a break and do some physical work or anything else that might help you break through it. I think this is incredibly important because the vast majority of what we talk about, and especially in having a couple years now of working one-on-one with people and having my own experience, I think we may have a tendency in the US and other places as well for success or wanting success, wanting maybe even to compete a little bit, which is another thing Rinpoche talks about in Dharma paths. But we, I think, often get a little too focused on the idea of achieving an end, like Buddhahood, with such an ambition that we actually create and strengthen a sense of dualism and separation through that ambition for something that we're feeling we don't have now, and we want that to be where we are now. So the balance is always the key, right? It's good to aspire for enlightenment, and we need to do that because we need to know where we're going. But ultimately, we need to know how things are right now too. And another book I've been working through lately that I'm loving is Chöling Rinpoche's Integral Buddhism, which covers a lot of really interesting ground that isn't in a lot of other books, including like sections on health and well-being and psychology. He even goes into a little bit of medicine. But he gave he talked about the word sati in Pali, which means several things. He said presence of mind, memory, and clear awareness. And he gave an example that he said the Buddha taught for meditation that I hadn't heard before, which was thinking. I'd actually heard this from Thich Nhat Hanh, I think teaches this, but the idea of instead of doing what we just did, sort of placing the attention on the breath, literally thinking, now I am breathing in, now I am breathing out. And he said that's one of the ways the Buddha taught to meditate. And that to me is a way that struck me because it's a way to cultivate presence and also be kind of embodied, cultivating presence, but also connecting a conceptual framework for what we're doing. So at least that's the way I took it. I haven't been taught this practice, so I can't say a whole lot about that, but I found that interesting. And it also struck me this idea of cultivating a clear awareness, because if we think of attachment being a cause of suffering, as the Four Noble Truths teach, and that attachment, the Buddha said, is to a self-concept or an idea of who we are. I think that's not just a fixation on who we think we are. I think it's often a fixation on how we think we should be. And that comes up a lot for me. I don't know if I'm alone on that one, but I think a lot of times we're really stuck on that idea of what we think we should be happening in a situation, how we should be feeling, or how we should be reacting, especially when we have this aspiration to be Buddha, not just Buddha-like, but to actually be a Buddha. So we have these two things we're holding all the time, this ambition, or this is more appropriately, this aspiration for awakening, and what we're encountering moment to moment. And similarly, I think that attachment to the self can manifest as a fixation on what is comfortable or what is familiar, I think is another way to think about what's comfortable. Another way to think of comfortable would be like what meets our expectations. And that ties in, I think, with the habit that Rinpoche mentioned when he was talking about those being on guard for torpor and excitement. We can make habits when we get into those states of reacting that way, finding that state of torpor excitement to be maybe even feeling like a state that we should be in, and then even kind of just reflexively moving into those zones. So we're trying to cultivate an awareness of how things are, and also being able to kind of steer our habits in ways that are more balanced and match our goals better. So I also recalled a quote of Pema Chodron's where she talks about ego being that which resists what is. And there are so many ways that we resist what is in the moment. So I think that the main point that we're going to be talking around tonight is just cultivating a real presence and acceptance and compassion of where we are in the moment. We'll talk a little bit about things we can do, but that will be more next time. And the main way I want to talk about this is, I'm not still sharing screen, right? Okay. So the main way I want to talk about this is what I want to have some dialogue about. I may have shown this to you in a previous talk, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper this time, which is the idea of comfort zone and the learning zone and the overwhelm zone. This has been huge for me in the last couple of weeks. I'm so glad. This was a teaching I got from Pema Chodron's Welcoming the Unwelcome, was where I first discovered this. And the idea being that we kind of find ourselves in one of these three zones. And I'll tell you where this hit me was I was doing some intervals with the jump rope. So like, 40 seconds of jumping, 20 seconds of resting. And I've got the little timer on my phone. I'm jumping and I'm jumping. And I recognize that, like, I don't know, 30 seconds into every interval, there's a point where I think I better look at the time. I mean, it's a timer, it's going to ding at 40 seconds. But I feel I get this urge like, oh, I got to look. And I want to look, right? Because I don't want to keep jumping at that point. Like, I'm a little tired. I'm a little out of my comfort zone. And like, somehow I feel like knowing the time that's left is going to make things better, right? I mean, does that really work? I don't think it helps. It probably makes it worse, to be honest. But it struck me because, and that's when I remembered this diagram. And I recognized, like, oh, that's the moment I've entered the learning zone. I just got into the learning zone right then, because I'm not in pain. I'm not like, this isn't something I can't manage, but I'm just a little bit uncomfortable now. I have exited the learning zone and I am now I've exited the comfort zone and I'm now in the learning zone. And really, like, most of what we work with in terms of meditation, and especially when we get into like the things that we learn about in Great Path and Awakening, as far as Lojong and slogans like give all victory to others and take all defeat on oneself. I mean, that's definitely some learning zone territory stuff. And I think there are ways to practice it that are a little safer, like Tonglen and things like that. But I don't think any of us just leaves the house after reading that and does it, without fail. I mean, it's not something we're really capable of, most of us, at this point. So having this diagram has helped me a lot. So, and I had some thoughts about it this week. So I was thinking about kind of how we feel in the comfort zone, which is usually happy, right? Like, that's where we want to be. We've got a smiley face there. When we get into that learning zone, right, it's not feeling as great. I mean, it might even be a frowny face sometimes there. But to be clear, the learning zone is a place where we can, when we're in that zone, that's a great place for us to be. And that's really where we want to be. And that's really what all of our Buddhist practice is for, is to try to learn and grow. It puts us in a space where we're outside of the comfort zone a little bit, but we're productively strengthening our skills and our awareness. And then we get into that overwhelm zone at some point once we've been in the learning zone for too long. So just like we might think about in meditation, kind of cycling from dull to agitated, from the attention placed to mind wandering. Similarly, we're always kind of traversing these circles. We're moving from comfort to learning to overwhelm. Another name, I think actually the name that Pema Chodron uses is the excessive risk zone for this overwhelm zone. So we're out of the zone where we're productively learning and we're into a place where we're taking excessive risk. And overall, really, like, this is just something that I think has been helpful for me in terms of being mindful, just being present and aware of the truth of where I am right now, the authenticity of the moment or the experience I'm in. And it's been useful because, like I said, we kind of start in this comfort zone. We want to be in the comfort zone. We might move into the learning zone, feel a little, less comfortable. But the longer we stay there, the more it grows. So the key is we want to hang out there because it will make that zone bigger. It will extend it. And as it extends, that overwhelm zone gets smaller. It's not taking up as much space. Like what was once our overwhelm zone, as we progress and become more skilled, It's actually a zone we can learn and challenge ourselves in, where we might not have been able to before. And then we're going to find, hopefully, after a while in that learning zone, that we're going to recognize, I need to go back to the comfort zone for a little bit now. And that's okay. And that has to be honored. And that's a good thing. And so, I mean, that's maybe another little really important thing to say explicitly here is it's okay to seek some comfort and some resource sometimes. I mean, we need to do that on the path. That's how we're going to make it. But then we move back into this learning zone. And maybe it's a little bit bigger now. And maybe we can even start to feel pretty good about being in that learning zone. So that's one of the things I've been working with this week is when I'm in these countless situations where I'm a little outside my comfort zone, because like so many things with meditation, like we have so many opportunities to work with this idea of being slightly annoyed. Like we just have these opportunities are coming at us all the time. So maybe in that moment, we can connect that feeling of a little bit of discomfort with our bodhisattva aspiration. Oh, you know what? I'm not really happy with what this driver is doing, but it's not that big a deal. And that's another sentient being that I want to bring to Buddhahood. So maybe I can actually just wish them a good day, or maybe even full enlightenment, But so in that way, we start to take that sense of being a little out of our comfort zone, but not into the panic zone. And we make it into a good thing. We kind of reframe it and tie our feeling to the outcomes of that. The outcome being more skillful, being more present, being more compassionate with ourselves and with other people. And if we hang out there for a while, and especially when we start to feel good about it, then our comfort zone grows too. So we're seeing how this diagram is changing as we work it, and then we may go back to the comfort zone a little bit. That's fine too. Head back out. And as you see, that red zone is getting much thinner. And if you think about our great masters in our lineage, Khenpo Rinpoche, I don't think he had an overwhelm zone, right? Like, how did he make that go away? It was through this kind of a practice. It was through doing practice that challenged him and knowing, I would assume, when he needed the resource and when he was able to dig in. And I think that's a trait of all great practitioners. And so then we head back into this giant comfort zone, right? But if here's another potential imbalance, maybe we really like it in that giant comfort zone. So we're hanging out there for a while. I like it over here. I like it over here. But then what might happen in there when we're not noticing is it's going to start shrinking. And the learning zone is going to start shrinking too. We still feel great in there because we're comfortable. But things around us are starting to close in. And this feels to me, I don't know if anyone here can relate, but this feels to me like when I maybe skip a couple days of meditating, get off my practice for some reason. Like you think like that first day, maybe you don't feel it too much, but maybe the next day, where you were comfortable is maybe not comfortable anymore. And it's surprising and maybe a little painful. I was doing this for the last 3 days and I really liked it. I was doing this, watching Netflix or whatever the thing I'm doing is for comfort. And now it's not feeling as good. It's because that comfort zone is shrinking and we end up a little crowded in there and maybe not even as happy anymore. And then we've got to go back to work. So, and then we've got this giant overwhelm zone too. So everything is kind of shrunk down so that so much is going to make us feel overwhelmed or panicked at this point. So that's the general presentation and that I want to talk about a little bit. Just one last thing here is you can superimpose that window of tolerance over this. And so one of the reasons I think this is important is because the overwhelm zone doesn't necessarily mean agitated. It could mean totally spaced out. We react different ways to getting overwhelmed in different situations. So I think it's really good to, when we're trying to maintain a balance, we always talk about not too tight, not too loose, not tightly focused on one thing, not spaced out. So it's good for us to be aware where we lie on that window of tolerance spectrum, as well as thinking about the learning zone circles, because overwhelmed could be spaced out, overwhelmed could be dissociated, like these are things we need to be aware of. And so what really got me, and what I want your thoughts on, is I started thinking about working the edges of the donut. So this is my little practice I made up for myself that I would invite you to try, and I'm curious of your thoughts about, which is really basically noticing the edges of this learning zone, noticing when we're passing from one to the other, having some awareness to be able to do that. Obviously, daily practice of meditation is going to make this easier to spot. And so my first question really is, like, can you think of some ways when you've noticed that you're in that learning zone? So I would invite, if anybody has any personal examples that they want to share, or maybe questions about this, but I'm just kind of curious because I told you mine, which is like the jump rope thing, like feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the exercise. I'm kind of curious if anyone here has examples of times where they felt like that shift from comfort to a little challenge, but productive challenge.
I have something when I hear noise or something that comes up in the just in the world.
Yeah. Like when you're doing your practice or just out in the world?
Actually when I'm doing my practice.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is that what you meant?
No, that's good too, though. But yeah,
Okay.
but if you have one for regular life too, I'd be curious about that as well.
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
in a
when
way,
there's
they're the same thing. Yeah.
A trigger, like somebody does something that's a trigger, sort of.
Like someone says something that upsets you, or
yeah, exactly, or see something that's not nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of chances for
Yeah.
that. Lines, maybe the post office.
Oh yeah, and no lines and don't bother me anymore, which is
Oh,
weird.
that's awesome.
I
Yeah,
know
that's
they
good.
used to. Yeah,
Huh.
it's Buddhism.
I think it is. There's got to be at least a good part of it. Yeah. Anyone else?
For me, it's every time I'm driving, I get so quickly irritated when somebody does. And I catch myself sometimes, but then sometimes I fall into it.
Do
But
you have a period at the beginning, or like if you're, I mean, for me, and I don't know if this, tell me if this is your experience, where like it may set out like, oh, it's beautiful today, there's no traffic, and then my expectations don't no longer meet the reality of the situation, and then I'm in the learning zone.
But and I also think, sometimes I mean, for me, sometimes, and I guess it applies to lots of things, is that instead of just going in the car and driving somewhere, if I think about before, like, okay, this time when you drive, see if you cannot get irritated. That seems to make a difference. If a little mindset, it's no guarantee that it doesn't work, because I forget when I do it, but I think it helps me to do that. And I guess that applies to everything, doesn't it? If you have like a little bit of thinking beforehand of what you do, you sort of at least mentally set yourself on a better beginning path. So,
Yeah, like intention setting. Yeah.
And I also
That's great.
I mean, I don't know if that's the same learning zone, but then, if I can't find a good example, but I do, then sometimes when I get mad about somebody while driving, I also feel bad about it,
Yeah.
I feel like that's for me the zone where I'm, okay, look, you know what you did, and you should now remember it for the next time.
Yeah. But I'm glad you said that too, because I think one thing that's important is to recognize that there's kind of two main attitudes, I would say. that we want to approach the learning zone with. And one is curiosity. So where it might have been resistance before, like actually cultivating some curiosity. And also a little sense of mastery, not like having mastered it, but like mastery as a process, like I can get better at this, that sort of feeling. Like maybe negative emotions are coming up, but I am improving, I'm maybe staying present. I've set the intention, which is a really strong foundation for any of this stuff. But really, like, I think what the biggest thing when those negative emotions come up is authenticity. I mean, in recognizing, like, we are talking about dharma and truth and seeing things as they are. Clear awareness was the phrase Tralek Rinpoche used. So recognizing those feelings, we don't have to feel good about feeling negative or having negative thoughts or saying negative things. But we do need to be authentic and not in that moment, again, try to should ourselves, as they say, or should on ourselves, So I think, and that's been a tough one for me too, because it's like, yeah, I get that. I feel bad about ways I think about other people or things that I've said to people. But at the end of the day, like, we are in this zone that's challenging. And we can, I think confession is a great way to deal with those moments, like at the end of the day, like calling before us Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, rejoicing in good things we did, generating some regret for the bad things, but resolving not to repeat them. I think that's the more productive way to sort of purify through those things. But that's a big one, because like I put the smiley face eventually in the learning zone, but I mean, most of the time, like, we're a little uncomfortable in that zone. And so some of things are coming out of us that may not be our ideal emotions, and I think that has to be okay.
And the danger is, I don't know, again, like personal experience for me is that then also, let's say if I get mad while driving with somebody, then I immediately think like, oh no, here you are, the compassionate Buddhist, and what do? Exactly the opposite,
Yeah,
I guess I'm not that compassionate and Buddhist yet than I thought I was, So then it's like another spiral you can go down quickly.
Absolutely.
It's not really helpful at all, because you
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I mean, I think that resonates probably with everybody. I mean, definitely for me. So then the next question would be, how do we know when we've left the learning zone? So, I mean, we know we want to spend time in that learning zone, and that's how we're going to become more skillful. How do we know when we've left that and we're into this zone of excessive risk? Anybody have any ideas of how you might? I have some, but I'm curious to hear yours too. So,
How do
go
you
ahead,
know
Lisa.
when you're? Oh yeah. How do you know when you're in that excessive zone?
Yeah, like how
I
do you?
know
'Cause
it.
yeah, like really, I'm talking about like that, the very edge. Like, how do you know when you've gone over that edge?
Gone
Like
over.
now you're.
When you kind of get in your own ego, or that's how. Well, it's like, yeah. Oh, right. I see what you mean. The edge.
Because obviously we want to know when we're in it, but ideally we want to
Yeah.
know it's almost like walking from one room to the other. We want to know as soon as we're entering that room, so that we can have a clear awareness of what's going on and be able to make skillful choices based on that.
Well, after this diagram, I'm going to think of that.
Yeah. It's a little harder, right? Because, and I think the fact that it's a little harder is indicative of the issue we were kind of just talking about. It's like we are so motivated for enlightenment that we kind of take it too far sometimes, and we end up making the suffering of suffering. Like something has happened that's unfortunate, and then we suffer more because something that's just happened that was unfortunate. And so how can we be as on the ball as possible? And I think for me, what I came to recognize is I think it has a lot to do with a sense of control, a sense of being in control of my external environment. And the less I feel in control anymore, the more agitated I get, and the less able I am to recall like Buddha nature and Bodhisattva aspirations and those kind of things. And I'm just sort of feeling out of control and challenged. And I feel like that control aspect is maybe, at least in my experience, the main way I've been able to spot that shift from learning to panic. Any thoughts about that?
I'm going to try to put this, I don't know if this is going to even come out right, but my thought is that, so if I usually stay out of my comfort zone, because that's my thing now. I just want to take risks and not get so comfortable all the time, because I don't like to work that way. I like to get out of my comfort zone, challenge myself there, take my practice with me wherever I go. And then when I get into the overwhelm zone, what happens is I realize it, I'll recognize it, then I'll quickly I have to accept, okay, you're in your overwhelm. I get in my overwhelm zone, and then I know how to take myself out of it. I know how to just practice this acceptance and say, there's nothing you're going to do. There's no way you're going to change anything. So I got to take a step back. Like I got to slow my roll and just say, this is my acceptance zone now. So I'm getting out of the overwhelm. I'm going into the accept. I'm going to chill out there for a while and then get back into the, taking the risks and the getting out of my comfort zone. So I like bounce between all of them and try to stay even, try to kind of and recognize each step of the way, like each part of the circle.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you brought acceptance up, because I think that relates to that whole idea of control. Like getting into acceptance is saying, you know what, I can't control anything but my own reactions, and even that is deeply powered by karma. So
yes,
yeah, I love that you brought it there. And I might say, if what do you think about this? Like, I feel like acceptance is probably a mix of comfort and learning that we can afford in any certain circumstance.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like if you're not, what are you going to do if you can't accept? I mean, that's not going to change. You can just stay in the state in that you're going to stay in the overwhelm zone. I don't want to be in that zone. I usually don't want to hang out in that zone. And if I am in that zone, it's just for a little amount of time, and then I quickly just get out of it.
Yeah.
That's from all the years of just hearing the teachings, listening to the practicing, hearing, contemplating, all of it. And also, what is my motivation? What am I doing?
What do you mean with the last one? You mean like in terms of practice?
What?
I meant like in terms of like, what am I doing? You mean like the practice or the?
Yeah, like how am I doing this now? Think about where is your mind now? Where are you going with this? Where's your mind going with this? Just like keeping an even, that's all I've been hearing about for the last, 12, 13 years. Just where's your mind, recognize it. And I have to do that a lot, like in a lot of different situations, I find myself doing it a lot.
Yeah. And there's a good dose of letting go in there too.
Tons.
Just letting go of fixation and attachment.
That's it. Letting go of the fixation and the attachment of the things that I will not be able to change. It takes a little more time sometimes, but I'm getting better and better at just doing it.
Yeah. That's great.
It's with age too. I feel like the older I get, the more I can do it.
Yeah.
Maturity
awesome.
and age and like having things happen, like experience in your life and what you've gone through. That's
That's great. Anyone else with ways of noticing that you're into that panic zone or overwhelm zone? And then the last question here would be, what resources and this is a question for each of you individually, and me individually too, what resources do you have to return to your comfort zone, if that's what you need? This may be the hardest question.
I know. What I have is recognizing my mind, where my mind is, being really paying attention, really going like, okay, where are you right now? Like paying attention to that, because wherever I go, my mind goes with me, and I want to make sure it's like, that's my resource.
Yeah, that's great.
I reach for any kind of Dharma, like video of Pema Chodron, or like a audio of Pema Chodron or something. Like just reach for that and start listening.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love her voice. And I mean, I'll tell you, some of these things for me are, music, could be food. I mean, getting back to the comfort zone, I just want to make the point, like it can be not a particularly Dharma practice. I would recommend you do whatever you do in a mindful way and compassionately, but I think, we're on the path, and we may need sometimes to go back to the things that do make us comfortable, even if it's not explicitly a Dharma thing, so I know there's a lot of people I've talked to who feel guilty when they do things that are mundane, and I think excessive mundanity, if that's a word, is probably not good. It's certainly not good. But I mean, we also have to be in this world and of this world where we are. So, I think it's okay sometimes to do those things that maybe we did before we found Buddhism, as long as they're not harmful things explicitly, and we're not getting attached or cultivating some kind of habit towards needing those things, turning it again into this like manipulation of the external world. But sometimes we need to do something that makes us comfortable, and I think that's okay. And part of the reason for that too, another reason I wanted to do this topic is I was thinking about how I don't know that we as a planet have ever had so much collective trauma going on. I mean, everybody's was part of what happened from 2020 to today with COVID, and there's political violence everywhere, and gun violence, and economic disparity, and systems of oppression. I mean, there's all these things that we're becoming aware of and beginning to understand a little better. And maybe worst of all, we're hearing everybody's individual opinion on it, everybody's relative opinion and emotions about it. And so I don't know that we've ever been this in need of some kind of a balance or care as a planet. And that's really where I'm going with these next few sessions, is like, how can we stay on the path and maintain our bodhisattva aspirations, but also be aware of the ways we can care for ourselves along the way, so that we can continue, with this practice and succeed. Any other thoughts on the diagram? So I guess the practice, I want to say that would be like that edges of the learning zone, if you can. Like, see if you can feel almost like if you were like rolling in a desk chair and you felt a little, the edge of a bump or something, like now I've moved from the comfort zone to the learning zone. I mean, it may not always be clear, but we're looking for ways to be mindful. And this is a thing that we can be aware of, that we can notice, and we can cultivate the ability to at least know when we've made those transitions, because then we'll be able to do more of the things we'll talk about in the future, like methods of making better choices and things like that. Bruce, what were you going to say?
I was going to say it's just that I think the whole presentation is just useful as a tool for framing experiences, because a lot of times I'm dealing with difficulties, financial difficulties at work, for example, or a variety of difficulties at work. And it just, and I watch, sometimes I have strategies, or sometimes, well, one strategy is just simply postponing, which can turn into procrastination rather easily. But nonetheless, sometimes it's just better to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this now, and let it sit in the subconscious, and I'll encounter a resource, something will present itself, or I'll just figure it out. So there are strategies, but I think it's just useful to be able to frame the experiences, particularly when I'm headed towards things that I anticipate will be distressful, or that I encounter and are distressful. So, it's a means of framing it, and then bringing some tool to bear on it.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, because I think there's a little different. So I had mentioned how I think the learning zone is curiosity and mastery. I believe that overwhelm zone is compassion. I mean, at least one part of it is what needs to be brought to bear when we find ourselves there. Ought to be some compassion. I think that relates to what Max was saying earlier too. It's like we find ourselves reacting in strong ways when we get to that overwhelm zone. And so I think compassion is one of the things that's really important. And then one of the ways on the cushion that we practice with the learning zone is totally Tonglen. I mean, we're dealing there with taking on suffering and giving away happiness, and that's learning zone stuff for sure. Thanks for sharing, Bruce. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this stuff? I'm glad you found it useful. This has been really helpful for me, because I am a chronic, what would be the word for it? Learning zone and ending up in the overwhelm zone without realizing it kind of practitioner. So this has been really useful to me, just because I've done a whole lot of that, and I think we're all prone to that. And so I think it's important to, number one, generate the awareness of where we're really at and what our capabilities are in any given moment. And then number two, to be able to make the choices that will help us achieve our goals in whatever state that is, whether it's the comfort zone or the learning zone or the overwhelm zone. In each of those, we have different methods we can apply. And then I'll talk more about that next month. But I think this alone is a really good daily kind of mindfulness exercise, just watching for these things, and in particular, noticing when that feeling of uncomfortableness could actually be a positive opportunity. And when that feeling of really not liking it is not a problem, like well, how would I phrase this? Getting into the overwhelm zone, is not necessarily your fault. It's kind of the fault of karma, countless lifetimes of karma. And so it is in our control what we do in the future and how that works out in the future. But in the moment, we can't get too hung up on why all of a sudden we're overwhelmed. What's more important in that moment is recognizing we're overwhelmed and making a smart choice about how to correct the situation. Thank you. Let's do actually a quick closing meditation as a dedication. So we'll take a deep breath in and out. And I'd like you to recall that resource that you thought of earlier, that time when you felt strong and confident, present. I'd like you to take that feeling and everything you learned tonight and in this lifetime and in countless lifetimes that's of benefit to beings. Imagine putting that in a box right in front of you in your hands. The gift box, nicely wrapped with a bow. You know, hold it out in front of you and imagine offering it to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and especially to all sentient beings, so that you can share all of that with all beings. And imagine that box starting to pixelate, break into tiny pieces, smaller and smaller, until it becomes inseparable from your entire experience. Nam di tanche jipan tapni pe janam panjen keka nanchi balab jupai tipe sobe jowan yawa. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lama Adam, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Everybody, next week.
Yeah.
Take care.
right.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
next month.
Night.